Welcome back, viewers. We're talking about the topic of immigration and Commonwealth liability and duty of care for those immigrants and asylum seekers. Greg, before the break, we were talking about taxi drivers, these type of people working these type of occupations who have been basically asylum seekers themselves.
Well, I mean, as I said, I think I was saying before the break, the profile of asylum seekers tends to be people who are well educated or certainly have skills. And it just beats me why in this country, when we do have skill shortages, particularly in relation to construction and engineering, etc., in boom states like Western Australia, that we are not capitalising on that labour market opportunity. I mean, effectively, asylum seekers represent part of a movement of labour around the world, just as we see capital move around the world. And yet we have a very open attitude towards one, that is capital, but we have a very restrictive view towards people coming into our community. The other thing to remember about all this is that this nation was essentially, particularly in the 20th century, built on asylum seekers coming out from Europe, and particularly Eastern Europe after the Second World War.
Guys, just to keep the conversation going here, I want to go to the responsibilities of government, and in particular I want to deal with this case of Bayrous and Secretary of the Department of Immigration. John, can you give us the facts?
Tony, it's a High Court decision in 2004. It's in regards to Mr Bayrous, who was in a detention centre in Woomera. He escaped. Now,
he escaped because he said the conditions were so harsh.
So harsh that he, through his lawyers, argued at the High Court that basically such harsh conditions were not lawful detention.
Greg, what is the implications of this fellow escaping in these circumstances?
Well, I think he was an Iranian national who'd come to Australia in 2001, and his escape would have been viewed fairly dimly by the Department of Immigration. But he certainly, his claim was, as you've rightly pointed out, John, was essentially around on the basis that it can't be said to be detention when your conditions are so cruel and inhumane that you're meant to put up with it. And at the Commonwealth, there has to be some sort of floor under detention in terms of standards.
But this case went through quite a few courts and ended up in the High Court. And basically, in short, the High Court said that it doesn't matter how harsh the conditions are. Isn't that right, John?
Exactly, Tony. They found that despite the conditions that Mr Bayrous was held in, he was in lawful detention, and therefore he was in, under the government's eyes and under the court's eyes, in quite fine detention.
And Greg, what are the implications for everyone else with this sort of a decision?
Well, I think the implications of the Bayrous case, of course, coming from the High Court meant that everybody had to follow it, were that the Commonwealth was effectively let off the hook in terms of immigration detention. That is, the conditions could be as harsh as it liked, and it would still constitute detention. It didn't, by the way, say that you didn't have a cause of action if you suffered injury.
No, that's
damage.
correct. Yeah, they did say that.
That's a different issue,
Yep.
you know. But they did say that look, detention can be as harsh as the Immigration Department likes it to be, and let me tell you, the Immigration, unfortunately, has followed that to the letter of the law until today.
John, is a policy decision I would have thought, because if the High Court had said that the conditions were harsh...
Exactly, Tony.
Could you see a flood of claims?
Oh yes, Tony. Yeah, and not only in the in that type of sphere, but also in normal state-run jails, also, Tony.
Do you see that as well, Greg?
Look, I think that's right. That if the conditions had been said to be inhumane, cruel and inhumane, and therefore not constitute detention, you would have had a whole lot of unlawful imprisonment cases, because people would have said, well, I actually haven't been detained lawfully. But unfortunately, although it's interesting to note that that decision was of the High Court when Murray Gleeson was Chief Justice, and I think the court might take a different view now. This is a much more liberal High Court under Robert French, and you've got people like Bill Gummo who've now shifted more in their thinking and become more liberal in their thinking with a small L. You might get a different result today.
Greg, just curiously, sorry,
Tony, if I recall correctly, Justice Kirby was the
great
dissenting.
dissenting.
Yeah. And I think the Kirby view of the world, which was that, look, there is a floor under which you've got to operate, or above which you've got to operate. And I think that view might find more favour today in the current High Court.
Agreed.
The decision had two main problems for Mr Bayrous. One, he got charged for escaping, And two, his prospects of getting a visa would have diminished, I would have thought. Is that your view, Greg?
That would have been, I think, a highly likely view. I'm not sure what happened to
Do we know
Beirut's
if he
case.
got a visa?
Don't know what's happened to Mr.
Well,
Beirut.
we'll have to follow it up.
He's
and
probably a
mention
very
it one or the other.
well-adjusted Australian citizen running a business in Adelaide.
Is that what you think, Greg?
Yeah, I think that's probably where he
Look,
is. If
it's
he is in
amazing.
Australia.
It's amazing. Since I started reading all the articles and really looking into this topic, I was of the view, which the majority probably hold, that we've got people coming to this country that aren't worthy of being here, which I now don't share that view. I think that there are people that, just like our parents and people like that, that come from harsher conditions in Europe. They came here to set up a life and they've done really well for themselves, most of them.
They want an opportunity,
And
Tony.
the thing is, Greg, you wrote an article back in June talking about asylum seekers and how you think they should be assimilated into society. What's your views
Well,
on
no,
that?
what I was saying was that we should stop this nonsense of mandatory detention and jailing people for long periods of time where their physical and mental health deteriorates to a marked extent. And instead, we should quickly process people through security checks and health checks and then have people resettled into the community. In Hobart, where I spend some of my time, when the Pontville Detention Centre was proposed, a number of Hobart people, a number of Tasmanian families, including a number of local government officials, said they would be more than happy to have asylum seekers come and live with them and with their families and to support them and help them. And the government should have responded positively to that. It could have been a great test case for the rest of Australia as to how you can do that, because the locking away of people, particularly, and I think it's particularly unconscionable in the case of kids, means that it's costing society in the long term in terms of poor mental health and poor physical
Greg,
health.
we'll turn to that shortly. But John, what Greg's saying is this. A bit like the young footballers that come out from the country and that. They put them in foster homes, a bit like Crawford, who come from Fenley, went to a family, lived with them for 4 years until he found his feet. He became well adjusted, ended up winning a best and fairest in the Brainline. Sorry, I keep
You took
mentioning
me to
Hawthorn.
Hawthorn Football Club
Yeah.
again.
And
I heard you do that.
He said,
What happened to them, Tony?
no, well,
what
look-
happened?
Back at the time when he first joined the club, I mean, he spent 4 years with this family, and it's amazing what they did for him because he became a well-adjusted young man.
But Tony, we're talking about 9,000 refugees.
Yeah, but there's a
It's
lot of
not-
homes
It's
out
not
there.
practicable.
Oh, I don't know,
well,
Greg. What-
this is a country of 20 million people. This is a country of 20
And John,
million
we would have saved
relatively wealthy
$15
people.
million. The families would have just, instead of cooking for 4 people, they cook for 5. Instead of cooking for 4, they cook for 6. What's the difference? They've got, everyone's got houses these days with 4 bedrooms. 2 are unoccupied.
Well, it's time to fill up McMansions again.
Look, we've got to go to another sponsors break, viewers. Look, because of the interesting nature of the topic, I think we'll skip the mailbag this week and keep talking to Greg Barnes. And so, viewers, don't go away. We'll be back shortly. Thank you.